So in this book we are using, in this series of podcasts, we are using adaptation and community resilience as synonymous. They should be, and they are not always, but nonetheless, here we are. Moving forward on adaptation or community resilience, let's look at a few ideas. Communities, climate change, adaptation, and win-win solutions. What are the summaries, key messages? The spatial, social, economic, and historical diversity of South Asia suggests that there is no single mechanism to ensure success in adaptation. There is no blueprint. It's a try and learn by doing adaptive management kind of approach that you need. This part of the world provides examples of both success stories and failures in community adaptation. Traditional knowledge, new innovations, sensitive state interventions, and market incentives all play a role in ensuring that community adaptation is optimal. Thinking global, acting local. As we said, all global warming is local, and I always rant and rave about IPCC not yet providing information at local enough levels for adaptation. So they have to get there someday. So thinking global and acting local is very critical, in fact indispensable for adaptation. While climate change is a global problem, there is a wide acknowledgement that adaptation to climate change will be a local challenge. This implies that communities will play a significant role in managing adaptation. They are capable of creating and adopting innovative strategies that are locally suitable, integrative, cost-effective, resource-efficient, and culturally appropriate. There is growing evidence and documentation of these successful efforts from across the global south. Global south is basically developing countries. Global north is all the rich countries, which are mostly to the north except for Australia. The role of external support is always critical. Despite the community's best efforts, in some cases the outcomes could be improved with external support. In the flood-affected Nowshera district of Pakistan, Ahmed finds that farmers could improve their adaptation outcomes if there was external technical support from the government. So it's not always just financial support. This is also evident in Kerala, India, where Devi et al. Document how farmer cooperatives with strong support from state agencies helped increase resilience in a post-flood situation. Collective action with state support helps farmers build on existing social networks that provide resilience during climate threats like sea level rise. Okay? Energy adaptation. In South Asia, over 60% of the households rely on solid biomass for cooking and heating, mainly using traditional stoves. In the absence of grid electricity, low-cost solar home systems, SHS we called before, have been used in many rural communities, which provides clean lighting options. But for cooking, the problem is worse in rural areas where there is an absence of alternative sources of cooking energy, and improved stoves for burning fuel wood are rarely available. Okay, so you get the idea. The extent of adoption of clean cooking energy, refill of LPG cylinders, has differed across states and districts and was found to be dependent on multiple factors, most importantly on the extent of state support for rural employment generation programs such as the Mahatma Gandhi National Rural Employment Guarantee Act. In Bangladesh, this paper found that the creation of appropriate market chains for LPG in rural areas could reduce forest dependence, with households voluntarily adopting LPG, liquid petroleum gas, instead of using firewood for cooking. LPG is at best a low emission fossil fuel, so it's cleaner than biomass. Now there is some debatable report that actually gas stoves are pretty bad for health. Okay, depends on the circulation, etc. What are the urban challenges in moving forward? Nearly 5 billion people are expected to be living in urban areas by 2030, and half of this increase is expected to be in Asia, with China and India absorbing 55% of the regional urban growth, suggesting that South Asia will face challenges in making our urban spaces more resilient. I have a separate section that will come up on urban resilience. Okay, well-known problems in the global south for urban sustainability include the lack of infrastructure, management capability of local governments, and fast-changing land use both at the center and periphery of the urban landscape that leads to disintegration of existing institutions and requires the emergence of new ones. If successfully managed, it could lead to greater resilience. Urban planning is not easy. That's where the terminology wicked problem came from. So I have podcasts on what a wicked problem is. Climate change is in fact a very quintessential wicked problem which you can listen to afterwards. Resilience and the role of women. I'm a big fan of this, training women to play a role in family and community adaptation and resilience. Women play an important role in the adaptation process. This paper examines women's collective action in Ahmedabad and other cities to show how India's urban slum areas are adapting to three types of climatic shocks: heat waves, flooding, and vector-borne diseases. These groups are able to increase awareness about the effects of climate change and the adaptation choices that these communities can make. They are also well placed to facilitate these urban changes and increase the resilience of the urban poor. Even in aspects of waste management in urban centers, women can play a significant role by creating awareness and promoting home-based segregation that can reduce the pressure on the city's waste managers. We read this a little bit before. Challenges to adaptation. It's also true that communities are not always able to undertake collective action. In the absence of either collective action or effective state intervention, the outcomes could be unsustainable and households become more vulnerable. The et al. Paper drew attention to the situation of water scarcity in Kerala, where there was neither any visible collective action by communities nor state presence. This has led to unsustainable levels of resource depletion. In fact, long-term trends indicate that parts of South Asia, the water table has been declining rapidly. This is driven partly by climatic factors like rising temperatures, erratic rainfall, and drought, but also government policies that subsidize electricity for agriculture. So unintended consequences of subsidies can be a problem. In this situation, state subsidy has not been beneficial for sustainable water use. So I won't read more of that, but you get the idea that moving forward again remains very much local challenge in terms of adaptation and building resilience. Community-based adaptation, coordination, and between let's say in the case of water that we discussed, there is an upstream watershed that is supplying water to a downstream community. The two communities have to work together, and downstream community needs coordinators which can help them maintain a good relation, and the upstream community requires incentives, for example, to maintain the ecosystem services to provide continued sustainable water supply to the downstream people. So there are always these, this plays out in terms of edges of forests which are tiger reserves, for example, or agriculturalists bordering on forests, or mangrove forests, livelihoods in the mangrove forests, and so on. So adaptation is always local because global impacts are always local. So how we generate local vulnerability and risk information is not very easy, but if we start with the data we have, it often becomes very clear that more data will be needed, and what kind of data will be needed, what granularity in space and time the data will be necessary to compute vulnerabilities. For example, even in a city, we talked about slums and their issues of waste management, water supply, health, etc. But vulnerabilities of that population will be very different than vulnerability of a richer neighborhood which has air conditioning or has cars and doesn't rely on public transportation and so on. So then you need data at that granularity of neighborhood scale to compute vulnerability, exposure, to the same hazard. The hazard may be the same for the whole city, but you need vulnerability neighborhood level vulnerability estimates and risks and exposures. Okay, so let's leave this here. We'll come back and have another section on urban resilience from a couple of reports that will be again a series of podcasts. Okay, this is a course that I'm just stitching together with different reports and papers and books. You can pick and choose which sections you want, because the IMF staff notes will all focused on economic principles, fiscal issues, fiscal policies, and so on. Whereas this one focused on community resilience. Next one will be in urban resilience. Then we'll look at adaptation through the Holocene and so on. Okay.